The dock had been quiet for nearly 3 hours. An old man settled into the far end of a county reservoir pier just after noon, carrying almost nothing: a battered coffee can, a mason jar of dark liquid, and a handful of plain hooks. No tackle box, no fish finder, no specialty lures. He pulled a small white cotton ball from the can, dipped it slowly into the jar, let it soak, then threaded it onto a bare hook and dropped it straight down. 40 seconds. The line went taut, not a lure, not live bait, not even a weight. A wet cotton ball on a bare hook. And the fish came to it like they had been circling, waiting for exactly that scent to reach them. What he soaked it in is the part the fishing industry spent 40 years making sure you never thought to ask about. Stay with me. Because what happened on that pier is not a trick, not a gimmick, not the luck of a good spot. It is the surface of something much older and much more deliberately pushed aside than you are going to expect. Here is what matters first. The cotton ball is not the bait. It is the delivery vessel. The soak is everything. What that mason jar holds creates a scent trail the moment it enters the water, a slow dissolving cone that spreads with current or rings outward in still water, reaching fish before any visual signal has a chance to compete. That is the entire mechanism. And it works because fish don't hunt the way most people are taught to think they do. Fish see last. They smell first. More precisely, they sense chemical signals through a system called chemoreception, a lateral line sensory network combined with olfactory receptors, sensitive enough to detect dissolved compounds at concentrations that barely register on standard lab instruments. A 1973 paper published in the Sport Fishing Research Bulletin, drawing on studies from the University of Washington's Fisheries Lab, documented this in precise terms. Fish locate food sources by chemical signal at distances that visual cues simply cannot match. A lure catches your eye on a tackle shop wall. It does almost nothing for a fish 30 feet out in cloudy moving water. A scent cone, though, that reaches them where they actually live, that pulls them in from water you cannot even see through. The biology was never a secret. The application was just quietly removed from the conversation. The old man on that pier was working on a different system entirely. And now here is where it gets important. There's a document I want to tell you about. I'm not going to open it yet. But I want you to know it exists. An internal memo, dated 1981, from a major fishing tackle manufacturer. A Midwestern company, still in operation today, roughly 400 employees, a brand name you would recognize if I said it. That memo contains the results of field tests this company conducted quietly, internally, and then chose to do nothing with. I'll show you exactly what it says before this is over. But first, you need to understand where this method actually comes from, because the cotton ball is recent. The logic underneath it is very old. Scent-based fishing is not a fringe technique. It is not a folk myth. It was not invented by one unusual man on a county reservoir on a July afternoon. Go back to the Great Lakes in the 1890s. Commercial fishermen working the inland waterways of Michigan and Wisconsin kept what they called bait diaries, handwritten field logs recording which natural substances produced consistent strikes across different species, different seasons, different water temperatures. These were not casual notes scrawled in a tackle box margin. They were working documents passed between families, updated across multiple generations, treated with the same gravity as a crop rotation record or a trade route map. Scent attraction was not a side technique for these men. It was primary methodology, the foundation of how they worked the water. The same tradition appears in the Ozarks across the same era. Different geography, different fish species, same core principle, that what you introduce into the water chemically matters more than what you present to it visually. An 1897 field guide to freshwater fishing in the American interior was explicit. The angler who commands the water commands the smell of it. That was not philosophy. It was practical instruction written for working people who had already confirmed the principle across years of direct experience. They had figured out, without lab instruments, without a research budget, without a university behind them, exactly what the University of Washington would eventually confirm with equipment decades later. This was not secret knowledge in 1897. It was not exotic. It was ordinary. The kind of practical understanding you pass to your children alongside how to read current breaks and clean a catch. So, what happened to it? This is where it changes. After World War II, the American fishing industry didn't just grow. It transformed at the level of what fishing was supposed to look like. The post-war consumer economy opened a manufacturing boom across recreational categories, and fishing tackle was positioned right in the middle of it. By the mid-1950s, the lure market had expanded into something that resembled fashion more than craft supply. New synthetic materials, new finishes, jointed bodies, spinner blades, deep diving lips, a different lure for every depth, every species, every light condition. Hardware designed to look extraordinary, hanging on a retail peg. Hardware that cost real money. Hardware that got snagged, wore out, and needed replacing. A cotton ball and a jar of pantry liquid earn no one a margin. There is no SKU for a method that works with ingredients you already own. There is no repeat purchase cycle when the solution is transmissible knowledge, something that, once learned, lives permanently in your hands. The economics were straightforward, and the magazines followed the economics. By 1954, something had already shifted quietly inside publications like Outdoor Life. Fishing historians who have tracked editorial content across multiple decades have documented the pattern clearly. Technique-forward coverage, the kind that explained water chemistry, scent behavior, feeding triggers, and the actual biology of why fish take certain presentations, gradually gave way to product-forward coverage. Gear reviews, brand features, lure guides built around manufacturer lines. The shift wasn't some coordinated conspiracy, it moved because advertising money moved. And editorial coverage followed the way it always has. Scent-based folk methods didn't get refuted in those pages. They didn't get formally debunked. They weren't banned. They simply disappeared from the conversation, quietly, slowly, over enough years that most anglers who came of age after the 1960s never knew they were missing something. The knowledge didn't leave the world. It just stopped being transmitted through the channels most people were paying attention to. Not banned, not disproven, just deprioritized. And in practice, that is what suppression actually looks like. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives as an absence, a gap in what gets taught, printed, sold, and recommended across an entire industry. Look back at the pier, the old man, the coffee can, the mason jar sitting open on the dock boards beside him, dark and still. He knows something the industry found it unprofitable to teach. He learned it from someone who learned it from someone fishing Ozark rivers in an era when this knowledge was plain and unremarkable, passed hand to hand, generation to generation, as ordinary as any other working skill. What he mixed that morning costs under $1. It has no brand name, it has no shelf presence at any tackle retailer, and it outperformed every $18 lure I had ever dropped into water. I'll tell you exactly what's in that jar. But before I do, you need to hear what the 1981 memo said. You need to see what those field test results actually showed. And you need to understand the specific decision that was made after the company finished reading them. The story goes back further than the 1950s, further than the 1890s bait diaries, further than the field guides and the Great Lakes commercial routes. Because scent-based fishing didn't originate with European settlers working American inland water. They learned it. Or rather, some of them were observant enough to notice what was already being practiced by people who had been reading these rivers and lakes for thousands of years before they arrived. native fishing traditions across the northeastern woodlands, the Great Plains river systems, and the Pacific Northwest interior used plant-based water attractants as standard practice long before contact, not as novelty, not as ceremony, as working method, applied with the same practical logic that governed every other aspect of subsistence. You use what works, you refine it over generations, and you pass it forward. Specific bark preparations, seed oils, crushed root compounds introduced upstream or at the edge of still water to draw fish toward a set location. The mechanism was the same one the University of Washington would eventually confirm in 1973. The biology doesn't change. The chemistry doesn't change. Only the century changes. The Lewis and Clark expedition journals, recorded across 1804 and 1805, contain a notation that rarely surfaces in mainstream fishing literature. A passage describing indigenous river guides along the Missouri using what the journal entry calls the method of the river people, effective beyond any iron hook alone. A reference to scent-based draw techniques that expedition members observed being used with consistent results in water that European-style lure fishing was producing almost nothing from. The explorers noted the effectiveness. They did not ask enough questions to understand the mechanism, and the knowledge moved no further into the mainstream record. Early American frontier practice did absorb fragments of this, scattered, imperfect fragments, but real ones. Settlers along river corridors in the Ohio Valley, the Appalachian drainages, the Ozark and Ouachita river systems incorporated scent-based draws into working fishing practice throughout the 1800s, not as exotic technique borrowed from another culture, simply as effective method confirmed by direct experience. By the time those Great Lakes bait diaries were being written in the 1890s, scent attraction had been part of practical American fishing knowledge for generations. It was not fringe, it was not unusual, it was close to ordinary, which makes what happened next even harder to look at clearly. Here is the part nobody tells you. In the 1970s, a new layer appeared. The fishing tackle industry had already spent 2 decades shifting public conversation away from technique and toward product. But starting in the early 1970s, a regulatory mechanism began to move underneath the commercial pressure. The EPA, operating under the expanding scope of the Clean Water Act, began developing guidance around substances introduced into freshwater systems, including, in secondary guidance documents, certain categories of non-commercial bait additives. A 1976 memo circulating within EPA regional offices flagged natural compound bait preparations for potential review under water quality statutes. Not banned, not formally regulated at the enforcement level, flagged for review, but flagged publicly enough that it created uncertainty, the kind of uncertainty that discourages casual practice even when no actual prohibition exists. That same year, the Sport Fishing Institute held its annual convention. Industry representatives attended in numbers. The case made from the floor by those representatives was framed as consumer safety. Standardization of commercial bait products protects consumers from unregulated additive use in shared water systems. The framing was sensible sounding. The effect was to push folk soak recipes further into a legal gray zone. Not illegal to use, not formally prohibited, but newly positioned as the kind of thing that might draw scrutiny, which for most recreational anglers was reason enough to set it aside and reach for the branded scent product on the tackle shop shelf instead. Notice the structure of that. No single law, no explicit ban, a memo, a convention floor argument, a vague regulatory shadow, and the result was a generation of anglers who felt slightly uneasy about a practice that had been standard, unremarkable, and openly taught for well over a century. The knowledge didn't get banned, it got made to feel risky. That is a much more efficient way to erase something. Now I'll show you what was in that memo. The 1981 document is a product development memo from a Midwestern fishing tackle manufacturer. 400 employees, a name still visible on tackle shop walls today. The memo summarizes the results of internal field trials conducted across 2 lake systems in the upper Midwest over the course of a single summer season. Company field testers compared scent-saturated natural fiber presentations, cotton and similar materials soaked in compound attractant solutions, against the company's own premium plastic scent lures across 9 controlled trial conditions. Different species targets, different water temperatures, different light conditions, different current speeds. The natural fiber presentation outperformed the plastic scent lure in 7 of the 9 trials, across bass, catfish, and crappie, in both still and moving water. By margins, the memo itself described as statistically significant. The decision recorded at the bottom of that document is 4 words that should sit with you. Not viable for productization. The reasoning that followed was internal and blunt. No repeat purchase cycle, no brand differentiation, no defensible margin. A cotton ball soaked in a 3-ingredient solution costing less than $1 is not a product. It cannot be branded, packaged, patented in a form that generates recurring revenue or positioned on a retail display in a way that drives category growth. The method worked.